It's the year 1918, and we follow the story of Pearl, an ambitious girl who's desperate to leave her farm life and be a star. However, her aspirations would have to wait as her mother entered the room, clearly upset. It appears that Pearl had taken her mother's dress without permission. She asks her to tend to the cows without wasting her time. As she approaches the cows, she speaks to them, sharing her dreams of stepping out into the world where she would be famous. Fueled by her imagination, she picks up a pitchfork, transforming it into a prop for her grand Broadway performance. Suddenly, a goose waddles into the barn, interrupting her imaginary stage. In a swift moment, she uses the pitchfork to stab the goose. Then she carries the lifeless goose to the nearby lake, intending to feed Theda, the resident crocodile. Later, Pearl is shucking corn alongside her mother, Ruth. Glancing at a newspaper, her eyes light up with excitement as she reads about the war's end. She tries to share the news with her mother, who vehemently asks her to stop talking about more dead Germans and prepare for dinner. Upset, Pearl fetches her father, who sits in a wheelchair looking frail and almost lifeless. The family gathers around the table, joining hands in prayer before their meal. It becomes Pearl's responsibility to ensure her father is fed. As the evening progresses, Pearl reads to his father a letter from her soldier husband, Howard. His words recount the harrowing experiences of war and his desire to return home. After cleaning him up, she feeds some medicine to her father, vowing to visit the theater later, where she hopes her dreams will one day come true. Then, this weirdo decides to bathe in front of her father. Just then, her mother enters the room, interrupting the peculiar scene to remind Pearl to pick up some medicine from town. The next day, she goes to the town to carry out her work. The town is plagued by a contagious disease, so she needs to cover her face and be extremely careful. Then, she goes to the theater to watch the dancers perform on screen. Once the film concludes, she goes to an alleyway to see a pamphlet about the movie she has just seen. Her face is lit up with curiosity and intrigue. Lost in her thoughts, Pearl is approached by a charming gentleman who offers her a cigarette. They exchange pleasantries before he extends an invitation to join him for another movie, free of charge. Pearl refuses as she has obligations back home. In a parting gesture, he presents her with a small segment of the film she had just seen, assuring her she can return anytime. Pedaling her bicycle on the way home, Pearl suddenly realizes that the piece of the film has slipped from her pocket, disappearing into the cornfield. Determined to retrieve it, she tries to search for it, but ultimately comes across a scarecrow instead. She clambers to the top and hugs the figure, asking if it would dance with her. She dances with the creepy scarecrow and even goes to the extent of making out with it, imagining it to be the guy from the theater. Suddenly, she realizes what she's doing and yells at the figure that she's married. Then, in the most bizarre turn of events, this creep gets herself off against the scarecrow. Her cries send a flurry of birds scattering into the sky, startled by the intensity of her pleasure. Back at home, Ruth is filled with frustration as she waits impatiently for Pearl's return. Concerned about germs, she instructs Pearl not to bring her hat inside. She immediately tells her to clean her father's mess. As Pearl bathes, she eagerly shares the events of her day with her father, wondering if he can still experience pain. Curiosity gets the better of her, and she pinches him, contemplating whether he's still present within or merely resembles the scarecrow. Then, she tightly clasps his neck, causing him to struggle for breath. During dinner, Ruth questions the whereabouts of the remaining money. Pearl lies that she has spent it on candy. Ruth, disappointed, declares that she won't have supper. She angrily explains the hardships they face as German farmers, highlighting the mistreatment Germans endure in America during this era. Later, Pearl turns to prayer, fervently asking God to grant her unparalleled stardom. The next day, while milking the cows, she receives an unexpected visit from Mitzi, her sister-in-law. Mitzi and her mother have brought a roast pig as a gesture of kindness. She also informs Pearl about a dance audition at the church. Returning to her room, Pearl daydreams about starring in a motion picture, inspired by one she saw earlier. Seizing the opportunity while her mother is preoccupied, Pearl sneaks into her mom's closet to find clothes to borrow. At night, she escapes through her bedroom window. Her destination? The theater. To her surprise, the door swings open, revealing the projectionist. They spend some together, sharing a drink, and Pearl opens up about her desire to audition for a life-changing opportunity. The projectionist then proceeds to show her A Free Ride, an illegal French stag film. When Pearl asks if it's legal or not, he predicts that such films will revolutionize the industry. Pearl then confesses her longing to explore the world, which prompts the projectionist to urge her to seize the present and make the best of it. Caught in a moment of frustration, Pearl utters a wish for her parents' death. Sensing her unrest, the projectionist suggests that she should venture overseas, just as he plans to do once the pandemic subsides. When Pearl sneaks back into her house, she hears the somber cries of her mother. The next morning, she takes her father to the edge of the lake. She summons Theta and strategically positions the wheelchair. Then, she delivers the news that she will soon embark on her journey and expresses his love for him. Suddenly, her mother arrives and asks her to take her father inside. An inevitable argument breaks. Pearl is convinced that her mother despises her, but Ruth claims that she's simply doing her best to navigate the hand she's been dealt in life. Life, after all, has a way of defying our expectations. As Ruth leaves with her husband, Pearl remains behind, calling out for the crocodile. Her attention is drawn to a nest filled with eggs, and she impulsively takes one and hides it in the barn. Lost in her thoughts of her husband, she decides to crack the stolen egg, envisioning her husband combusting like that. Later, during dinner, Ruth reveals the pamphlet of the movie. Concerned about Pearl's health, she insists that Pearl quarantine in the bunkhouse. Nevertheless, Pearl gathers the courage to confide in Ruth about the upcoming audition. Ruth, however, calls her ungrateful and selfish. She further tells her that she cannot leave the farm to pursue her sinful acts. She becomes even more agitated, screaming that she has assumed the role of her husband's mother rather than his wife. Suddenly, she brandishes a knife, threatening both Pearl's life and her husband's. She instructs Pearl to attend the audition and hopes for her failure. Pearl, on the other hand, asserts that she never wants to become like her mother. The two engage in a heated argument that escalates until Ruth's dress accidentally catches fire. Pearl hurries to fetch a bucket of water, but she's too late. Although Ruth survives, she's disfigured, so Pearl dumps her in the cellar. Then, she leaves to go to the projectionist. Of course, they sleep together. In the morning, the projectionist offers to drive her home, as it's the day of the much-awaited audition. Later, on the drive back home, a figure catches Pearl's attention. A soldier walking along the street. She squints to catch a glimpse of his face, but can't be certain if it's Howard, as he is wearing a mask. Upon reaching her house, Pearl asks the man to wait outside while she tends to something inside. Pearl proceeds to apologize to her father, who remains seated at the dinner table. Leading him to another room, she administers some medicine. Eventually, Pearl invites the man inside to meet her father. Then she takes him to her room. While they're kissing, a strange noise interrupts them. Pearl urges him not to investigate, but curiosity gets the better of him. Pearl insists that it's just their pet dog. To divert his attention, she suggests showing him the farm animals. Caught in her web of deception, Pearl's lie unravels, and she admits they don't have a family dog. A sense of unease creeps over the man, causing him to make an excuse to leave. Pearl suspects that something is wrong, but he keeps denying it. Suddenly, her whole demeanor shifts and she begins yelling at him. She asks if he intends on taking her to Europe, but he doesn't reply and tries to leave. Unable to bear the thought of him leaving, she grabs a pitchfork and pursues him outside. In a frenzied act, she stabs him twice, and he begins to crawl away, desperately trying to escape her clutches. Determined not to be abandoned on this desolate farm, Pearl drags him out of the car, delivering a final blow with the pitchfork, ending his life. She then dumps his body for Theta to feast on. Now, she prepares for her audition. She begins to clean her father, whose eyes reflect pure horror. Once dressed, Pearl parades her outfit before her father, his expression still frozen in fear. She grabs a pillowcase and, with an eerie calmness, expresses gratitude to her father for everything he has done. Then, she suffocates him to death. Once Pearl arrives at the audition, she meets up with Mitzi, who informs her that they will only select one girl from each town. Pearl desperately asserts that she must be the chosen one. Sensing Pearl's growing nerves, Mitzi suggests they switch places in line, and Pearl agrees. Finally, it's Pearl's turn to step onto the stage. As she positions herself on the designated X, she tries to give it her all. The music begins and Pearl's body moves to the rhythm. She finds herself surrounded by women, portraying soldiers in an elaborate dance number. She immerses herself completely in the performance and even blows flying kisses. But alas, when the dance concludes, the judges offer their gratitude to Pearl before delivering the disappointing news. It's a no. Suddenly, Pearl's excitement shatters, and she wakes from her delusion. The judges explain that they are seeking someone younger and blonde, an all-American person, someone with the X factor. She begins to hallucinate and sees the judges transform into haunting visions of Pearl's mom, dad, her husband, and the projectionist. Determined not to accept defeat, Pearl adamantly refuses to leave. She vehemently declares that she is a star, desperately crying out for help in the face of rejection. Eventually, Pearl finds herself outside, still consumed by sorrow. Mitzi offers to take her home, and that's where we all know it's not going to end well for her. As they return to Pearl's house, Mitzi realizes that the roast pig they had given Pearl's family remains untouched, filled with maggots now. In the kitchen, Pearl is struck with the realization that her mother was right all along. Mitzi steps in, attempting to console her about the recent audition. Pearl then confesses that something is deeply wrong with her. She admits to harboring a disturbing desire for her husband's death in war and reveals that she has been unfaithful to him. Mitzi tries to make a quick exit before Pearl can launch into a more personal trauma dump, but her attempts prove futile. Pearl continues her verbal onslaught, revealing that she felt relief when she experienced a miscarriage. She despairs over the thought that perhaps the farm is where she truly belongs, as she might not possess any real talent and lacks a friendly demeanor. She also admits to taking the lives of innocent animals and enjoying the act. But that's not all. She further shocks Mitzi by confessing to the murders of both her own mother and the projectionist. Desperate for acceptance and love, Pearl reveals that all she ever desired was to be cherished. In an attempt to just escape, Mitzi tries to slip away, as if nothing is amiss. She reassures Pearl that nothing is inherently wrong with her, attempting to offer comfort. Pearl, seemingly detached from reality, tries to congratulate Mitzi on winning the audition. Confused, Mitzi informs Pearl that she did not land the role. Pearl, unwilling to accept Mitzi's denial, accuses her of lying. Mitzi, now fearing for her life, decides to play along. This revelation angers Pearl, fueling her desire to hurt her. Suspicious, Pearl wonders whether Mitzi will betray her trust and expose her actions, but Mitzi assures her that she will keep everything a secret and leaves. Yet, Pearl relentlessly follows behind. Pearl seizes an axe and starts pursuing Mitzi with murderous intent. Mitzi cries for help, but she stumbles and falls to the ground. Unhinged, Pearl raises the axe, relentlessly striking her. In a montage, we witness Pearl's unsettling methods of disposing of the bodies. She dismembers Mitzi, severing her limbs and head before tossing them to the crocodile. Pearl's eerie actions continue as she brings her decomposing parents to the dining table. There, she begins the maggot-infested pig, carefully orchestrating a disturbingly special dinner for her loved ones. She clasps her hands together, uttering a prayer for the grotesque meal before her. After a while, Howard, having returned from the war, arrives home, unaware of the horror that awaits him. He steps into the kitchen to witness the horrifying scene before him. He notices Pearl, who looks at him with an unsettling, almost psychotic smile of happiness upon seeing her husband's return.